Study Section 3. Tools of Discovery. Introduction. Having discussed the motives of European expansion, our next focus is on those tools that assisted them in carrying out this mission between the mid-15th century and late 17th century. Europeans visited almost all the regions of the globe accessibly by sea. These voyages of discovery were facilitated and/or made possible due to two crucial elements: the technical changes in the instrument for and skill of navigation and financial backing it received. Thus, our major focus in this study section is to find out in details what these technical instruments are and the sources of the finances with which the voyages were sponsored. Learning outcomes. When you are studying this section, you should be able to 1. Describe and explain the tools that aided European voyages between the 15th and the 17th centuries. 2. Give detailed reasons why finance is very essential in the course of European expansion and who provided the required fund. Terminology. Navigation. The process or activity of accurately ascertaining one's position and planning and following a route. Bearing. A person's way of standing or moving. Technical tools. Maps, ships, and guns. By technical tools, we are referring to the ships, maps, charts, and guns that were of significant importance to European explorers over a period of discourse. The era between the second half of the 15th century and the end of the 17th century marked a rapid expansion of geographical knowledge and the application of science and technology in enhancing the instruments of navigation. In the past 1,400 years, several breakthroughs in technological developments were made that positively impacted on the effort of Europeans at overseas ventures. There was a concentration of Europeans on the study of geography and astronomy, with particular emphasis on how it would be useful in solving practical problems of navigation. There was improvement in the knowledge of chart making with the aid of astronomers and geographers. Through their contributions, Europeans became more aware of the fact that the Earth is spherical rather than flat. It must be noted that it was Greek geographers such as Ptolemy and several Arab geographers that corrected the notion of the Earth being flat. For our purposes, these wrong notions about the nature of the Earth that was erased further emboldened sailors to venture into far high seas as their earlier fears of falling off to the surface of the Earth become a thing of the past. As a consequence of this improvement in geographical knowledge, sailors could now afford to lose sight of land while they relied on estimates of latitudes and longitude, which helped voyagers in determining distance from north to south. This, coupled with the perfection of the compass, which had been in use since the 13th century, contributed immensely to the work of European expansionists. Ship represented another valuable tool of discovery. The application of science and technology radically altered its efficiency, capacity, speed, and functions. The ships used before the 15th century were usually not big enough to carry large numbers and lacked adequate space to carry food for a long voyage or bear substantial cargo. Moreover, they depended on rovers and had limited range in the ocean. Consequently, most of these ships could not withstand storms and strong winds in the Atlantic Ocean. This made them unsuitable for exploration. However, in the 15th century, there was considerable development of skill in building ships and in handling the new larger ships. By the 15th century, European ships that were hitherto inferior to those from the eastern terms of design and workmanship had been greatly improved to become the best in the world in terms of seaworthiness, endurance, capacity, and fighting power. Unlike the clumsy ships of pre-1400, the new sailing vessel could cope with strong Atlantic winds, which had more space for seamen and cargoes. The designs, which were a product of Oriental and European ideas, were modified constantly in response to the experience of seamen and what they needed in the high sea. Indeed, the ascendancy and domination by Europeans of other peoples of the world can be linked with their development of the ship. This is so when cognizance of the fact is taken that for a long time the sea remained one of the most important ways of moving cargo and fighting forces from one part of the globe to another. It is therefore not surprising that with the development of other efficient and effective means of mobility, such as the aircraft, the importance of the sea as a major highway diminished, and so did the status of European nations in the world politics. Another vital tool for overseas expansion was the gun. Guns were needed to subjugate uncooperative autochthonous peoples of different areas, expanded to or to fortify established settlements. Naval gunnery thus helped voyagers to fight their way through hostile regions, like the case of Cortes in Mexico, or the encounters with Arabs at the Indian Ocean. The development of firearms, especially as it affected naval gunnery, gave European sailors great advantages over various civilized groups. It also instilled in them a courageous spirit, since they knew that they were well equipped, as they became able to defend and defeat even groups that were superior to them in terms of numbers. Although gunpowder was not a European invention, by the end of the 14th century, firearms were being manufactured all over Europe. By the 15th century, artillery had emerged as an important weapon of war. The invention of artillery greatly revolutionized naval warfare. Being its invention, fighting men on board a ship often sought to kill as many men on the enemy ship as possible. The implication was that the ship had to be close to each other. However, with the invention, most European ships began to carry this weapon. Exactly when this started is shrouded in obscurity, but we do know that with it there was a change in naval tactics, as Europeans now sought to use the artillery in sinking enemy vessels from a distance instead of aiming at the foot soldiers on board. Furthermore, it made it possible to sail close to the coast and from the coastline, bombard hostile or uncooperative groups without disembarking from the ship. Lastly, it made it possible for a few Europeans to take on overwhelming populations of such group of people in a confrontation. The artilleries were usually mounted between decks with the sides of the ship pierced in such a way as to provide opening for shooting. From the round port opening that made for only straight firing, the subsequent ships were modified in such a way that the range covered by the artillery was much wider in scope. The technical superiority in ships and guns and the judicious application of both ensured the continuous development in European exploration and the permanency of its results. Financial toll. Overseas expansion therefore meant an increase in the scale and intensity of war and, logically, the production of armaments. It also demanded for the training of soldiers, sailors, and in maintaining military outposts in places where they had established forts. Providing for all this would require a lot of finance, and this brings us to the last important tool of discovery, which is the issue of financial backing. The saliency of this last factor lies in the fact that it formed the bedrock of adapting technologically innovations and ideas to the building of ships and manufacturing of artilleries. It must be borne in mind that in Europe of our period, there was serious primitive accumulation of capital in such a way that it was concentrated in very few lands. There were just two avenues open to voyagers who needed financial backings. The first was government finance, i.e., the court often personified by the king, and the second is that provided by commercial firms and companies. It must be noted that before the 15th century, some European states like Italy had set up firms constituted mostly by wealthy merchants who had interest in trading within the cities around the Mediterranean. This example was later followed by Portugal, Spain, Holland, and England. These firms were the ones that later came up to finance the explorations. For example, the Dutch East Indian Company contributed in financing several voyages. With regards to government support, it can be said that without the backing of the rulers of the European states, most of the expeditions would not have taken place. Prince Henry sponsored substantial number of the voyages down the African coastline. The voyage of Bartholomew Diaz was undertaken under King John II, 1481 to 1495, who provided the financial backing. The Spanish government financed Columbus' trip, while England augmented the finances of John Cabot for his expeditions to the Americas, and same for Hawkins for a trip to the Guinea coast. Study section summary. In this study section, you have learnt that 1. Between the mid-15th century and late 17th century, Europeans visited almost all the regions of the globe accessibly by sea. 2. These voyages of discovery were facilitated and or made possible due to two crucial elements: the technical changes in the instrument form and skill of navigation, and the financial backing it received. 3. Technical tools employed were ships, maps, charts, and guns. End of study section 2. Thanks for listening.